And thank you so much for coming out this morning. We're really excited to have you here and have yet another wonderful conversation. My name is Cisa Keller. I am the Senior Vice President of Early Childhood Quality Development at Think Small. And it's my pleasure to welcome you to this second event of our four-part series focused on implicit bias in early childhood education. We launched our Small Talk series a few years ago with the idea of initiating conversations on topics important to early childhood fields and discuss innovative solutions to early learning issues in Minnesota. Is it like backfeeding? Looking for, okay, good. This morning our conversation will build on our earlier conversation in this series where we examine both individual and collective implicit bias in early education. Our conversation today continues that examination by also addressing the question of who's accountable and how can we all take responsibility and put accountability into practice. Our guest panelists will discuss family and community knowledge systems, the accountability pathway, and the on-the-ground efforts and models of putting accountability into practice within early childhood programs. I want to make sure to first thank you, our sponsors, who have allowed us to offer these Small Talk series for free. If you're here representing one of the sponsors, please stand and be recognized. Today's sponsors include First Signature Services. Oh, Todd Swanson is here. If we can give Todd a round of applause. First Signature Services is an event sponsor. And then we have Lakeshore Learning, which is our builder sponsor. And Kelly is here in the back. Up here, if we can give her a round. Thank you so much. And finally, an additional builder sponsor is the Montessori Center of Minnesota. And I believe Terry is here. Terry's in the back with Kelly there as well. Thank you so much to all three of you. Now it's my pleasure to welcome and introduce you to our moderator for today's panel discussion, Tracy Nordstrom. Tracy is joining us again and is the founder and principal of Verve, a placemaking consultancy. Tracy considers herself a placemaker, a pedestrian, a community member, a cyclist, a researcher, a writer, a strategist, and a change agent. I want, do you have that all on a business card? Awesome, okay. She came to placemaking from over 25 years of design work and from a commitment to public space and the people who use them. For 4 years, Tracy served as an elected commissioner on the Minneapolis Park and Rec Board. She's volunteered with several community nonprofits, including currently serving as a Think Small board member and our governance committee chair. Tracy holds a master's degree in public affairs from the Humphrey School of Public Affairs with a focus on leadership, policy, and advancing the common good. Please join me in welcoming Tracy. Thank you, Cisa. Well, good morning, friends in early learning. Good morning. We are here for an important discussion on implicit bias. And before we begin our discussion on implicit bias, I would like to make an explicit acknowledgement. And that is that we are gathered here this morning for this important conversation in St. Paul, and we are on Dakota homeland. And I want to acknowledge that. And I want to also remember that each of us has a story we bring to this place. Some of us come to Minnesota, which, by the way, Minnesota is a Dakota word, which means the land where the waters reflect the sky. Can you all say Minnesota? Minnesota. Thank you. Some of us come to this place as immigrants. My ancestors, for example, my grandparents came from Norway and Sweden. Some of us in this room have indigenous roots. Some of us were brought here not by choice, but by force. But whatever our journey, we are here today to talk about implicit bias. So thank you for joining us. I would like to start by telling you why or how I got invited to do this, aside from my work at Think Small. Diane Halsey, who's right here in the front, who is Think Small's Senior Vice President of Family Engagement, asked me to moderate. And you might notice I have very pale skin, and I identify as Caucasian, as a white woman with Northern European ancestry. And I had a brief moment where I wondered why I would be the choice to talk about implicit bias. And Diane, in her wisdom,
said, well, Tracy, I have been listening to you over the last few years talk about your journey with Dakota friends in the community on the name restoration of Bedema-Kaska, which is formerly known as Lake Calhoun. Some of you might know about that story, that journey, that controversy in Minneapolis. And I get very excited when I get a chance to talk about it, because as a 50-year-old woman, I started to really learn about Dakota history in Minnesota, something that in my own experience, going through the public school system in Minneapolis, I learned almost nothing about. So I was telling Diane about my experience, because we're friends, and I was just blah, 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 telling her about it. And I got very deep into the conversation describing what I was experiencing and all that I was learning, and I stopped short. And I said, I feel like I'm saying too much. I feel like I'm telling a story that is not mine to tell, because I was describing my experience of what I had learned with my Dakota friends on this journey of battling, and that's the right word, sort of dominant culture, to make language and story and history known. And Diane, in her wisdom, said, wait a minute, what did you just say? And I said, I don't feel like this is my story to tell. And she said, this is your story to tell. And she startled me. She reminded me that it is my story to tell because I'm an advocate. I have implicit bias. I have implicit bias. We all do. And I'm on a conscious journey towards anti-racism. So I'm here to admit that. That's part of my explicit acknowledgement as well. So that's our context. We have some amazing panelists who are going to come and join us, and they are going to share some of their experience both personally and professionally, and it will be a rich conversation. I promise you, you will learn something, and I promise you might be a little uncomfortable. That's okay. And then, after they have shared their professional expertise and their personal experience, we are going to have a chance at our tables to talk about what we've learned, to talk about our own implicit biases, and to talk about how we can take that discomfort and move out into the world and make change. You will also notice that you have some questions on your table that we'll get to in a minute. There's some pens and there's some Post-it notes. And we'll get to those in a minute. I'm going to ask each of you for a call to action. So with that, welcome. I would like to invite our panelists to the stage. Why don't you guys come on up, and I will introduce you as you are walking up, and then I'm going to give each of you just a couple of minutes to talk and introduce yourself. So you can raise your hand as you're walking. We have Jamie Bonsick, who is the Executive Director of the Hopkins Learning Center. We have Daniel Gumnett, who is the CEO of People Serving People and the Center for Excellence Preschool. And Betty Emerita, did I say that right? Yes, you did. Beautiful, who's the President of Development and Training, Inc. So welcome them to our table this morning. To begin with, I thought we would just go down the list, and we'll start with you, Jamie. Let each of them introduce themselves to you, and they can describe just 3 or 4 minutes of your own personal journey to get you to this place today, exploring implicit bias, both professional and personal. So Jamie, take it away.
Good morning, everybody. I started off as a teacher, and I probably about 15 years ago had an experience where I realized I was othered. If you're not familiar, there's something that happens in early childhood. It's called token teaching. It's when somebody studies people, a group of people for a week or 2 weeks, and then they pretty much stereotype everything. And then it happened to me, and I was like, what? I'm a person with a disability. There's not a week about people with disabilities. People with disabilities are every single day. And I got really, really, really mad. And I went to the director of the program I was working in at the time, and I was like, this is really offensive to me. I'm a person with a disability. I don't get a week. And she was like, well, it's okay. We're still going to do it. Your colleague still gets to do it. And I thought, well, that can't be right. So I did what any person might do, or at least what I would do. I decided to go to graduate school to study how children 3 to 5 develop bias. So I moved myself to Chicago and decided to go to a school where I was one of, in some of my classes, the only educator, the only blonde person, the only white person in some of my classes, because I really wanted to study social justice from a perspective that I had never had before growing up as a person in North Dakota. So I went and I studied anti-bias education. I've been talking about it ever since. And then about maybe 3 years ago, and I don't know if it was because of the political climate we're in, I don't know if it's because I left Head Start. Working in Head Start, if you've ever had the opportunity, there is a sense of urgency around making sure that all people get what they need. Moving back into the general early childhood field, when I went to look at the systems that supported my staff to start unpacking some of their backpacks, I realized it wasn't there. Our system is not built in the same way. It's not built with funding. It's not built with educational supports. What I mean by that is you can take like a one and done class. Like, oh, I go to a 3-hour class, a 2-hour workshop. Of course, now I know how to interact with all people, and I am culturally, I don't even use the word humble, it's competent, right? Like, you can become competent in something in 2 hours, but anybody who knows anything about studying knows it takes at least 5 years of diligent study. So then I guess I started my 5 years of diligent study in anti-racism, because what I realized was on the spectrum of all things that include isms, that was the area that I hadn't pushed myself to my limit. And so it was time for me, and I began this journey, and sometimes it was so horrible, and sometimes I cried, and I did this, there's a book, it's now being published, it was free at the time, it's called Me and White Supremacy, and it's a 28-day workbook, essentially, to look at how things in systems are setting up some for success and not other people for success. And then, of course, what any rational person would do, I decided to put what I had learned in having conversations with one of my best friends into an article and publish it nationally, because we were embarrassed at what we found about ourselves, but we also knew that other people were not talking about what we were talking about behind closed doors, and we needed to bring that conversation to the forefront. And so we wrote an article about white fragility, which is in your packets. And I mean, we'd been asking ourselves these questions, but I don't know how hard we'd been pushing ourselves until we made the commitment to become accountability partners. And we'd started, but we really wanted to make sure that we were holding ourselves as leaders accountable for pushing ourselves and our staff forward, because all children deserve to be seen.
Thank you. Go ahead, Daniel.
Good morning, everybody. Thanks for coming out on this icy morning. Appreciate it. If you remember one or two things from today's conversation, one of the things I'd like you to remember is that family homelessness is not the fault or the failure of individual families, but is the result of failures of the systems that are designed to help these families. And one of the failures in the system is structural racism. So we at People Serving People are working very, very hard to try to shift the narrative in the community away from an individual family fault narrative to one that places the blame squarely on the systems where it belongs. We are an organization dedicated to ending childhood, youth, and family homelessness, and we have placed early childhood development at the center of our theory of change. Because we passionately believe that if we are going to break the cycle of poverty and homelessness, we need to ensure that children have access to quality learning, whatever that looks like for them, so that they are prepared for school and for life. I'd like to acknowledge a couple of our staff folks here, Meredith and Kelly, who are part of our amazing team. Raise your hand. Kelly Rogers was instrumental in helping us forge our early childhood development program and has played a really excellent role in helping integrate our Center of Excellence with our shelter work. So we're very lucky to have them in the audience, so we're very lucky to have them on the team. Have I missed anybody else for People Serving People? Great. At our shelter, we shelter probably about 350 people a night. The average age of a child is 6. The average age of a person is 15. Just to give you an indication as to how young childhood and family homelessness is in Hennepin County. We have early ed programs both at the shelter that are for our families in shelter, but we also have a program at our Center of Excellence, which is in the Phillips neighborhood, another neighborhood of concentrated poverty, which allows our guests to stay engaged with our programs for a longer period of time. I am happy to say that at our Center of Excellence that 75% of our staff represents the community in which we're located, which is pretty darn phenomenal if you've visited most early ed programs to have that sort of ratio. I'm not sure how we got there. I was asking the center director how he got there, and he said he doesn't know, but I think that's something to be proud of. So we're working really hard to break the cycle, increasing access, but we can't talk about increasing access to early childhood development in the state of Minnesota without acknowledging and focusing on structural racism and equity. And that's just, you just can't do it. So some of the work that we've been doing, I have 1 minute? Okay. Some of the work that we've been doing is really focusing on how we can become a trauma-informed organization. This is a journey we've been on for a long time, and obviously, if you're talking about a trauma-responsive organization, you need to focus on historical trauma, which then creates an important conversation around structural racism. If this is a long, complicated journey, we've had to place all of this in the center of our strategic plan. Racial equity is at the center of our strategic plan. Placing our families' voices at the center of our work is in our strategic plan. This is going to be a long, difficult, multi-year journey that's going to advance a step, go back 2 steps. It's going to be hard, and it's going to take a really, really long time. Personally, a lot of this work for me has come out of my engagement with an organization called Mill City Kids. And Mill City Kids is a group of systems leaders and community members who believe that outcomes for Native American and African American children in our community is absolutely and totally intolerable. And we're just like, can't take it anymore. And we're dedicated as systems leaders to figuring out how we can help more and harm less. Because much of the work we do as systems leaders, even though our intentions are good, we are actually harming the children that we think we're helping. And part of that is by continuing to look at our work through our dominant culture lens, with our bias, through our structural racism, if you want to use dominant culture narrative or white supremacy, whatever word you're wanting to use, but that viewpoint continues to harm the children we think we're going to help. So in order to do that work, we took Diane, I think, was part of this whole process. It took it was like a 2-year deep dive into historical trauma. Because we didn't think we could really talk about acute trauma without having a very solid grounding in the history of how our Native American and African American community has suffered historical trauma and continues to experience that today. So I'm out of time. I'm going to pass it on to Betty.
Good morning, everybody. Oh, is this on?
Want to try this one?
Okay, thanks.
We know this one works.
Good morning, everybody. This has been a great opportunity to reflect on, how did I get into this work? So, I'm originally from North Carolina, and my whole life has been about being unceremoniously dumped from one cultural environment to another with absolutely no preparation. And it is a very humbling experience. And I have done every kind of permutation that you can probably think of. So I started out in North Carolina in an all-black environment, and my barbaric cousins from the north would come to the south, to Warren County to visit, and I would be appalled. And then I would visit them, and I would think, oh, this is horrible. And then I went from an all-black environment to an all-white environment when I was in college. And then when I was in graduate school, I went to a very mixed environment. And then I was in a mostly African-American environment and an African environment. And let me tell you, there are things that shift dramatically in all of those contexts. Things that are ways of understanding, ways of entering a room, ways of making your thoughts known, and ways of letting people know you're listening to them or not. And these are all doorways to different information. A lot of information that you absolutely will not have access to unless you have some humility about yourself. And it has been a huge learning experience, and I was not even aware until I reflected on this morning that that's probably why I've been so passionate about FACET. FACET stands for Family and Community Engagement Tools, and these are two tools that I developed in partnership with the Wilder Foundation. FACET is a way of engaging families on a much deeper level around things that they really care about. FACET was developed out of, it's a survey tool, one for parents, one for staff. They consist of 14 to 15 questions, and they are administered by coach facilitators. And actually Think Small, with Bush support, had me train the first cadre of coach facilitators to administer FACET I think in 2017, 2018. And it was really an incredible experience. One of those facilitators was Jamie's co-author, Hannah De Rojas, and it was amazing. So FACET was developed out of a series of community dialogues in 9 different cultural communities across Minnesota: African American, Hmong, Latino, Ojibwe, Somali, Irish, Swedish, German, Norwegian. I mean, we tried to get everybody. And we looked at what were the themes that came out across all of those different groups. What were the things that people were really passionate about? And we asked them what was important to them in how they were raised, and important to them in how they were raising their own children. And 3 things emerged. People wanted their children to be good human beings. People wanted their children to have a positive sense of themselves. And people wanted their children to be able to appreciate and navigate their social networks. And when you think about it, these are the things that sustain you your entire life. They give you access to opportunity. They pick you up when you fall down. They give you access to resources and reciprocities that sustain you your entire life. Oh God, I've got 2 minutes. FACET is a way that programs, FACET is recognized by the Department of Human Services so that programs that use these tools can receive points toward their quality rating score. We think this is very important. And some of the dialogues that come out, the process is that the tools are administered. The coach facilitators then input the data into the FACET data system, which is housed at Wilder. They get an automated report back, and then they give that report to parents and staff. They bring the 2 together and say, this is what you all said. And they're not specific recommendations. They're about patterns. This is where there was a lot of agreement. This is where parents were saying one thing, staff was saying another. This is where there were lots of disparate answers. How do you all want to use this data to improve your program? And the conversations that come out of this are astounding because people talk about the things that really matter to them. And one of those things is otherness. So one of the questions is about, do you have concerns about how society treats your child? And it could be about anything. It can be race, ethnicity, culture, class, language, body size, skin color. It could be anything. But these conversations allow those things to come out and allow people to see the windows, to have windows into other people's experiences. And the kinds of decisions that programs will make out of those conversations are really exciting. For example, I mean, one of the comments that was made at a conversation on White Earth, one of the parents said to staff, you know, I never realized before that we're actually co-parenting. You're spending as much time with my child as I am, and we really need to be on the same page. Wow. In another program, this is Way to Grow, the results from the data went into that program deciding to fund ideas, great ideas that parents had. So they developed a little fund for those ideas. In another program, parents who were from different immigrant communities and had been in conflict realized, wait a minute, I don't really have a problem with you. It's the different rules and regulations that are applied to our respective groups differently that's causing the conflict. Let's go out in the hallway and talk about this. I mean, who could predict that? Nobody could predict that. And these are wonderful conversations that it puts data and the use of data and the meaning of data in the hands of local folks. At the same time, it's building a database that will allow families and practitioners and providers to influence public policy. So we're really excited about that, and I hope you all will explore this further.
Thank you. This reminds me, in this conversation that we are having today, that our implicit bias discussion today is the second in a series. How many of you were at the first discussion back in October? Quite a few of you. And for those of you who are new, welcome. Just because you're new today does not mean, well, maybe it does. Maybe your implicit journey is starting today, and if so, welcome. I would guess that for most of us, this has been an ongoing journey. And as we've heard from our panelists, it continues. We might have an aha moment, as I did at age 50. It only took me that long to recognize what I've been missing for so long. So thank you for being with us today on this journey. So my first question, and I'm for our panelists, I'm going to just offer a question, and if you feel compelled to speak, please do. I want this to feel like a conversation. And the first question that I have for people like me in the audience, how can white or Caucasian early childhood educators build self-awareness of what it means to be white and to carry that privilege of dominant culture in a racially diverse society? So based on your experience, your research, your observations in your workplaces, how can white early childhood educators begin to build self-awareness of what it means to be white in a racially diverse society? Jamie, you're reaching for the mic. Go for it.
So I had an opportunity last week to go to NACI and speak with my colleague Hannah. And one of the opportunities, while I was there, I got to sit in 2 different sessions specifically on whiteness by Jima Jordan and Kate Engel. And I will tell you that that opportunity doesn't exist here. So not in the way that it could. There is one session in our training kind of catalog that is white privilege beginning the conversation. And as somebody who's been trained on that, it's not good enough. So I would say, how can we start to build? We have to have entry-level conversations, and we have to meet people where they are, but we have to meet them not in a safe space, we have to meet them in a brave space. Meaning, children deserve better than what we're giving them in many organizations, and it's systemic. So it's not a person-specific, we're not up against person-specific issues, we're up against systemic issues. So I would say, how can we build self-awareness is that we have to start conversations, and they have to be meaningful and intentional conversations. They can't be skirted around conversations. You can't go back to your program and say, hey, I met this white girl, she wrote this article, you should read this. If you do that, please have a conversation, but it can't be a 20-minute conversation. And some of the things that I'm a little bit concerned about, even with this question, are that we have requirements in licensing that says you need to have training for your staff. But it doesn't say how long, who's qualified to give those trainings, how long, what are the meaningful impact. So I, as a person, when I was a teacher, I had an opportunity to do a 10-hour, so it was 5 sessions. But I was allowed to go 5 sessions, so once a week for 5 weeks, I went for a 2-hour in-depth training, and it was funded. So that was like my intro. Okay, and that was 15 years ago, and this is where I am now. So it is a slow process, but it can't be a one and done. So that's where I would say is that we have to start building systems that bring people along and hold people accountable in a way that there's a way to measure whether or not you learned anything, and it's really challenging in a workforce development crisis, but if we don't do it, who really benefits? It's a concerning question to me.
Yeah, thank you. Go ahead, Betty.
This is a small...
I'll just take that one. Just hand me that one.
Read original documents. I think that is, and that's something you can kind of do in the privacy of your own home. But read treaties. Read some of the documents associated, 35W coming through Rondo. You would be astounded at the things that people said about just the way in which things played out. I mean, it's all in the documents. It's not hidden, and it is so different from anything that most of us have been exposed to in our education, in our formal education. And that's no matter what we majored in, no matter what school we went to.
Anything? Daniel, you're going to pass on this one.
Okay.
Yeah, no.
What they said was really insightful, and I don't want to repeat what they're saying.
Right.
There's one other aspect, which is not the primary aspect, but we all want to be effective, and we're not going to be effective if we keep doing this. So if for some people it may be appealing to their sense of wanting to do a good job and wanting good outcomes, and we're going to continue to have bad outcomes or less than optimal outcomes, because there are some good outcomes.
So I have a question for the audience. How many of you think that Minnesota is burdened by Minnesota Nice? Is that a possibility? Yeah. I mean, I think many of us feel, and I don't know why, we are adverse. I guess this makes sense. We are adverse to conflict. We are conflict averse. We are opposed to wanting to ruffle feathers or in the workplace. But what I'm hearing is that we need to generate these conversations. How many of you feel brave enough to start a conversation? How many of you are not sure? So what I'm hearing is we need some funding to do this, and we need good training, and we need to look at the stories of those who are around us, those who came before us and those who are with us here in society, to really begin to develop that empathy and that understanding. Certainly for me, learning the Dakota trajectory was really helpful, and so some good advice. So that discomfort is something that we as Minnesotans struggle with. We just got through Thanksgiving. Many of us maybe avoided difficult conversations and difficult topics. So my question next is, how do we, as individuals, but also as Minnesotans, begin to manage our capacity, expand our capacity for discomfort in these conversations? Do you have any tricks or tools in doing it in such a way that we remain upright and among friends, even though it might require each of us to wade into difficult territory? Betty?
Yes. Put yourselves deliberately in situations in which you are outnumbered, outsmarted, and not in charge. And I think cultural humility is really important, because when you recognize that you do not have all of the answers, and you don't even know what game is being played, let alone what the rules are of that game, then it makes you more open to understanding yourself in relationship to others. And it also gives you a deep appreciation for the compassion that people show and the time that they take.
Thanks, Betty. It's going to be uncomfortable, and that's okay. And I think as a society, we, often are looking towards, whether it's in the medical world or pain management means no pain. Well, that's not actually, there will be pain, and it's going to be uncomfortable. I think that as a white person, just keep showing up is really, really important, and know that you're going to make mistakes, and you're going to say really stupid things, and you're going to be corrected, and you're going to feel really humiliated and embarrassed. But you know what? You'll survive. And this work that we're trying to do together around equity is not about making us as white people feel comfortable. Okay? That's not what we're here to do. And so we're talking about this a lot in People Serving People, and one of the things that's really uncomfortable is the word white supremacy. So I'm a Jew, and my family did not survive the pogroms in Russia. They didn't survive the Holocaust. When I hear the word white supremacy, I think of men in brown shirts with swastikas carrying torches, and it freaks me out, right? And so I keep pushing for, well, let's use dominant culture, whatever, but this is my issue. But I just have to keep showing up and pushing through it and be aware of my trigger and just keep saying, yeah, every time we use the word white supremacy, I freak out, and maybe 3 or 4 years from now, I won't freak out anymore. So it's not we're going to be uncomfortable, and we're still struggling with this. This is something we talk about all the time. How do we find the right language to talk about this? And I think we just have to acknowledge that we're just going to be really, really uncomfortable. And that's okay.
So for me, one of the things was to have accountability partners, and to understand that there are a lot of, whether it's white supremacy, white normative, dominant culture, things that I always thought were like really good traits about myself, like perfectionism, or workaholism, all of these things that really just reinforce the trauma that I've experienced in my life, but also are upholding dominant or white supremacist culture. So when you ask the question, like, why, this Minnesota nice, it's essentially we're holding up something that somebody else, typically the patriarchy, has said this is the best way to be, and it's oppressive. And so my capacity for discomfort and having conversations to constantly unpack my daily experience, because this is a daily experience for everybody, right? Like, if you're not talking about how uncomfortable every day is, call me. You'll help make us. I will help you feel uncomfortable, and I promise.
Will you share your phone number with all of us?
I have cards. I'm not joking. I will make you uncomfortable. But here's the 3 things that really have across this is, one, am I curious? Like, when I feel that in my body, sometimes the trigger feels like heat, like I'm embarrassed, I don't want to talk about this, and then it's the compassion, like, just breathe, you're going to be okay. And then the third component is the courage to just sit there and be like, I'm going to do this because it's what I need to do, right? Like, people who have ever been on a diet or tried to, like, exercise for fitness, this is a way of building your mental muscle. right? So think about it that way as it's building your discomfort.
So it sounds like, because I think many of us, I know I'm looking for some strategies as I leave today to think about this. And actually, I am in a moment going to ask you to write down your own call to action. So maybe now is a good time. There's some Post-it notes on your table and some pens. If something up here that our panelists are saying is compelling you, that will motivate you into some sort of action when you leave, feel free to write it down, and we're going to collect them in the back. So I think the niceness gets in our way, and we are adverse to discomfort. But I wonder if it's helpful if you bring up dieting, Jamie, or exercising. One of the ways, right, that we trick ourselves into this work is we imagine what the outcome could be and what the shared goal is that we are moving toward. I wonder if that's helpful, and I'm wondering if in these moments of discomfort, when we have a meeting, perhaps with our colleagues, or we have an opportunity to address an individual that is expressing explicit or implicit bias, to remind each other what our goal is. And we are a group of people here that are early childhood advocates. And we are talking about what we are transferring and lessons that we are giving to our children. So how could we maybe frame a shared value? You mentioned curiosity, Jamie. We need to understand what everyone's values are, right? We need to find some common ground. So maybe for the final 5 minutes or so of our discussion, we can talk about how we might frame, first of all, how we might uncover what those shared values are, where we note difference, and how we might, in a difficult situation, for example, we have a child, our child, in a situation where they're experiencing implicit bias. How might we, as advocates and those who want change, address those difficult conversations and uncover what those shared values are? And maybe they're not shared, but maybe the goal is discomfort while we're coming to some understanding. From personal experience or in your work, how can we address that? How can those of us that are trying to make change have those conversations? Where do we start?
Use Bassett.
Okay.
And also approaching this as it's really a profound adventure. Is anybody familiar with that? It's an image of, it could be either a vase or profiles of two people. So there is a moment when your body is understanding, oh, this may not be a vase, it may be profiles. It's unsettling. You can feel it as a physical discomfort. This is like that on steroids. And it's an adventure because once you understand that it can be both, you're never trapped by thinking it's only either. And it gives you more choices. So I think that if we approach this journey with that lens, and we're able to recognize when we're in those situations, and when we can help others who are in those situations to see the both and that it's okay, I think that it will, I'm on a quest for the survival of humanity, okay? And I think that unless we come to appreciate different ways of knowing and different ways of understanding the world, it's going to be a real challenge for us to survive. And certainly not from one cultural lens. We can't survive from one cultural lens.
Thank you. Daniel.
So leadership matters. And so I'm going to talk about from like an organizational perspective. So leadership matters. If your board doesn't get this, then get a new board. If you don't think you can get it and you're the CEO, then maybe do something else. You need to put money in the budget to do training. You need to write it into job descriptions. You need to put it into evaluations. You got to walk the walk. And if you don't think you can do it, then hire somebody on your team, spend the money on them, and have them help you do it if you can't do it. So leadership really matters.
Thank you.
I'm just going to echo that. I'm fortunate enough to have a board member here, and my board member yesterday asked me about the diversity statement in which we've just officially agreed upon not being a statement for statement's sake, being a lived philosophy of the organization, going into hiring practices. When that comes down to it, though, I'm just going to go back to systems, in that the state of Minnesota does not have what I would believe is decent leadership development around this for early childhood educators. So if I come from a larger system, I come from a one of, like we're a 7-classroom one of nonprofit. If I come from a larger system, I have access. When I came from Head Start, we had access to some federal funds, and it was in the law to make sure that we were doing these things. Independent nonprofit or even for-profit centers, it becomes a choice. And I would encourage us, as we move through discomfort, to stop making this an opt-in. I mean, it is. For white people, this is currently an opt-in, and I'm just going to go back and say I think that's egregious. I think if we're going to benefit all children, we have to look at leadership, and we have to put some form of funding into making sure that educators get the leaders that they need to help them along this journey, or we're going to keep perpetuating the same results that we've always had.
Thank you. I trust that we have a great deal of wisdom in the room, and I'm going to now give you each about 10 minutes at the tables. You have a small piece of paper, a couple of them on your table, that have some questions that actually come from Jamie's article, which is also in your packet, and I advise you each to read that and have a conversation about it. But you'll see there are 4 questions, and I want to give you, as an individual and your table, an opportunity to wrestle with one of those questions, and you can choose. We've only got about 10 minutes. If you are at a table where there's only a couple of you, that's fine. You can have a conversation with 2 of you. If you want to move, so a couple of you are independent, free thinkers, join in, because we want this to be a conversation. So one of you at the table, I would request, be the leader. So step into that role, be a good leader like Daniel is asking us to do. And let's take 1 minute, just look over the questions, and then begin speaking. Yes, ma'am, you have a question. I'm sorry? Oh, yeah, do you want to pause for just a minute? Do you have a question? Anyone? We can do questions. We're running out of time, so yes. Do you want to do some questions?
My question was, okay, so I have been asked to spearhead stuff for parents, like working in early childhood. And so my question is, for parents with white or biracial children, how do you encourage them that it's important to take this step, not only with their kids, but for themselves, without making them not necessarily feel uncomfortable, but I feel like you have to wrestle with them if they don't have a language to have a conversation with their kids, but then also encourage them that it's important for their white children, or if they have biracial children, that it's just as important for them as it is for students of color or not.
That's an excellent question. So the question is, let me reframe it, and just so that everyone can hear it. Particularly for parents with white children, but also children that are biracial, how do the parents initiate the conversation with the children?
Or how do you encourage them to be a part of that space?
Encouraging the parents to be part of that space of understanding implicit bias. Excellent question. Thank you.
We hired Paula Landis to come in, and not to put her on the spot, I don't know that she's catering everywhere, but to come in and host Talking to Your Children About Race. And other people do that work, but what we did was, we know that it's an important thing. It needs to be part of the programming that we offer. Everybody needs to be held accountable, but sometimes having somebody who comes in that's your friend, that you trust, that you know is going to lead that conversation in a way that supports your families along is helpful.
I think being able to refer people to support groups is really important. I think a lot of times with interracial couples and families, people totally underestimate the fallout from that within their own families, or even how they will have to advocate for their children. And if they have, this might be a second marriage, and so they have white children and biracial children, and how those children are going to be affected, because the children are noticing differences in how they are treated. I mean, people are hungry and desperate for support. A lot of times they don't know how to language the problem, the issue. It terrifies them because it gets at the heart of deep family relationships. And so sometimes just asking a question or pointing them toward a resource, a discussion group can make all the difference in the world, and then build on from that.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions? Yes, sir, in the back.
I just had a follow-up question. What are some of the support groups that are there? Fine, or are there anything?
So the question is a follow-up to that is, what are the support groups or the resources that are out there for families?
I wish I had a list. Actually, there are different types of doors that you can go through. Some doors are under faith-based communities that have a real emphasis on, for example, in the Baha'i faith, there's a real emphasis on humanity as one family. And there are many different discussion groups in private homes, sometimes in events. I know, the Buddhists, different communities will come at it in different ways. Christian faith comes at it a different way. I think also there are advocacy organizations that may focus on a particular aspect of something, maybe early education equity or something. So you just have to find the compartment that's easiest for you to enter.
Or offer it, I heard someone say, offer the resources. That's an excellent point. So I want to be mindful of time because I know all of you have to go out and do great work. Let's take about 5 minutes at your table, and I have 2 requests. One, you may refer to this list, any of these questions. Feel free to talk about it in any way you want at your table. And I'm also I don't have my Post-it notes. Use a Post-it note. I'm going to ask you as we leave a call to action. So you should have some Post-it notes. So as your discussion is going on, this is a note to yourself about what you can do moving forward in your professional life or your personal life. We're going to gather them and I'm going to put them together and create an artifact, which we'll get back to you on with this. But let's just take about 5 minutes at your table to just talk about implicit bias, your experience, your questions, your challenges for your table mates, and you can use these questions, which come out of Jamie's article, as a guideline. So I'll give you 5 minutes. Go to it, people. It is 2 minutes to 9, and I want to launch you happily back into your work, because you all are doing good work. I hope you learned something from one of your colleagues, and I know we all learned something from our panelists. Diane Halsey's going to close us out, but I want you to take your Post-it note now, and I want you to write. And my call to action today from this, I'm inspired by this table, which challenged me already when I came in, and the excellent question. I'm going to start a difficult conversation, and I'm going to do it with an open heart and with curiosity. And I'm going to have a difficult conversation with somebody in my community that I cross paths with today or in this week. So I'm going to write that on my Post-it note. So take just 10 or 15 seconds if you are able and willing. Write down your call to action, and I'm going to collect them. I'm going to meet you at the back, and we're going to put them up on the pieces of paper back there. And you'll see these again. I'm going to harvest them, and we're going to put them into. I'm going to take some pictures, and we'll send this out. So let me write mine, and then I'm going to meet you over there, and Diane Halsey, our Senior Vice President of Family Engagement, and my teacher, who challenges me all the time, is going to lead us out. Thank you. You're amazing human beings. Our panelists, you are doing amazing work, and the work starts when we walk out this door. So thank you, friends. I'll meet you back there, and here's Diane.
Thank you. Yes, let's give a big thank you to Tracy Nordstrom and all 3 of our panelists for the wonderful job they have done today. I hope what you have seen today is a modeling of a very difficult conversation. We knew going in that talking about implicit bias is difficult, especially here in Minnesota. So we hope that what you have seen is, if nothing else, a conversation being had on some difficult topics, but being done well and in a way that moves us forward. So I don't want us to leave before we thank all of our event sponsors again, those 3 people that stood up earlier. Thank you so much for sponsoring this event. Thank you all for coming out on an icy cold morning. And please look for, this is the second in our series this year. We're going to be having 2 more. So please look for the announcements of the upcoming ones. And don't forget to put your Post-it note up on the paper as you walk out the door. Thank you very much.